Hi, this is Jenny Dauer again, and in this screencast I'll be giving you an overview of the Carbon Time teaching units. Hopefully this will give you enough information to get you excited to teach the units next year and to be sure that they fit with your expectations of what this project is about. So, the curriculum that we're offering is based on many years of learning progression research at Michigan State. All of our units share the common purpose of helping students to analyze familiar systems and events, from plant growth to people losing weight to turning on light bulbs, by uncovering the carbon transforming processes that are hidden within them. We've found through our research on learning progressions that this is a complex and difficult challenge for most students. They see many aspects of these familiar events, but it's difficult for them to discover the underlying chemical changes. So we'll share more of our findings of that research and how it informs our curriculum during subsequent workshops. So all of the units are targeted towards helping students trace matter and to trace energy during carbon transforming processes. So just as a brief review, there are 6 Carbon Time units that are targeted to middle school and high school grades, specifically grade 6 to grade 12. So Systems and Scale is an introduction to carbon transforming processes and focuses on the process of combustion as well as powers of 10 and atoms and molecules and what those are. So there's a little bit of introductory chemistry, sort of. And then Plants focuses on the process of photosynthesis, biosynthesis, and cellular respiration. Animals focuses on digestion, biosynthesis, and cellular respiration. And then Decomposers is similar to animals in that it also focuses on digestion, biosynthesis, and cellular respiration, but all within the context of a misunderstood organism like fungi and microbes that do decomposition. And Ecosystems teaches all of the carbon transforming processes except for combustion at an ecosystem scale. And then Human Energy Systems involves all the processes and then also additionally includes the combustion of fossil fuels for energy in our human systems. So our summer workshop will primarily be focused on these units and familiarizing you with the curriculum in the resources and materials involved with them and getting you prepared to teach. So by August, you'll be able to access the first 4 Carbon Time curriculum units on the National Geographic Education website. And then shortly after that in the fall, the other 2 units, meaning Ecosystems and Human Energy Systems, will be available on the same website. Although if you want them earlier, Ecosystems and Human Energy Systems, than August, then we will also have Word document versions that we can share with you in case you wanted to do those 2 large-scale units during the fall. But this summer, we'll train you on how to use the National Geographic website and for how to use all 6 units in our up-to-date and revised materials. I want to mention the Carbon Time summary document, which you can download from the Files tab on the workshop website. This document outlines the way learning progressions are used in the curriculum, the activity sequences, and how we've structured the curriculum around formative assessment, and the learning goals for students, and our strategies for effectively teaching about carbon transforming processes. So feel free to download this and to read it some more. There are 4 things that we think are important to making Carbon Time. So when teaching the units, we know that you'll adapt the materials and modify them for your own use and for your particular students. So we came up with a short list of essentials that say what it means to be teaching our units. I'm going to introduce these to you today as a way to talk about the important features of the curriculum, but we'll use this list again in August to talk more in depth about each of these 4 things and how to teach and adapt the unit materials. So the units have 2 broad goals, and you'll hear us refer to these often. First of all, scaffolding inquiry. So the units have students doing measurements and using evidence to support an argument about carbon transforming processes. In the units, the inquiry activities are structured by a predict, explain, observe, explain activity sequence that allows students to first express their ideas and then connect their explanations to evidence with a final explanation that uses observation in it. The unit also have activities that scaffold student accounts. So accounts is our somewhat jargony word that means explanations of a phenomenon. So this means that the units help students work on their explanations of materials, structures, location, and movement of carbon during carbon transforming processes. And in the units, the account activities are structured by what we call a model, coach, fade activity sequence, which starts with highly scaffolded activities and that fade into more responsibility to the student for their explanations. And we'll talk much more in subsequent workshops about the activity sequences and how and what they indicate to you as a teacher for each particular activity. So this is a representation for how we think about scientific practices. Science is built upon lots of observation of the material world and then patterns of all of these observations. And all of these are used to inform models and conceptual models that we use to explain the world. So in our units, when students are doing inquiry, they're using observations that they collect to look for patterns across maybe a bunch of student groups in a classroom, and then they're trying to tie their observations to an explanation or a model that explains a certain phenomenon. And then when students are creating an account or an explanation, this is applying a conceptual model that they have in their minds to a pattern or experience a phenomenon in their everyday life. So these two practices, inquiry and accounts or application, are the things that we're asking students to practice in each of our units. And we'll explain more soon about how they tie into our frameworks of these activity sequences in future workshops, but this is just an introduction because you'll see this again in the future. Okay, so that was the heady cerebral stuff that we'll do more later, but now let's talk about the more fun stuff. So here are what some of the tools for the inquiry investigations are like. So in systems and scale and animals and plants and decomposers, students will measure the weight of something, so here's soda water, before and after a process, and they'll also use bromethylthiamyl blue, or BTB, to tell them about the presence of carbon dioxide. And these are the two tools that are used across these 4 units. So BTB is an acid-base indicator that turns from blue to yellow in the process of carbon dioxide. When CO2 dissolves in the water, it lowers the pH. And here a teacher's blowing into a straw into the BTB to cause the color change. So, for example, in the animals unit, what you would do is have the students weigh the mealworms and a potato, and then they're placed together in a little container, and then both are placed in a sealed container with a petri dish of BTB. And then after a certain amount of time, the mealworms and potato are weighed again, and the color of the BTB is compared to the original color. And so here you can see that because the mealworms are doing cellular respiration, the BTB turns yellow, and the students will also find that the weight of the mealworms increase because they've been eating, and the weight of the potato decreases because it's been eaten. And so then you use this investigation to talk about cellular respiration and digestion and biosynthesis. And so each of the units has an activity kind of like this. So systems and scale has 2 activities, burning ethanol, and an optional activity about soda water fizzing. The plants unit, students grow lettuce and then figure out if the loss of mass of the soil can account for the growth of the plant's biomass. And then they also measure the color of BTB with plants in the light and the dark. And then in the decomposer unit, students make some moldy bread in petri dishes and then see that the overall bread and mold system loses weight, even though there's all this new gross stuff growing in the petri dish. And of course, then the BTB turns from blue to yellow when the multi-petri dishes are in a chamber, so it's also doing cellular respiration. So more about those later, but each of these investigations in the 4 units are then followed up with molecular modeling activities where the students account for matter using models like these here, and they account for energy using twist ties, as you can see here. So when we're talking about chemical energy, then the twist ties are attached on to the molecular models where there are carbon-carbon to carbon-hydrogen bonds to represent chemical energy. So for example, this is a picture of the molecular modeling activity for photosynthesis in the plants unit. So we also have kind of fancy animated PowerPoint slides for each carbon transforming process that tracks matter and energy separately as a companion to the molecular modeling. So here's cellular respiration from the decomposer unit, and so you can see that all of our molecules that we use have yellow bonds for high energy carbon-carbon, carbon-hydrogen bonds in organic materials, and just gray for normal lower energy potential bonds, and that heat and light energy is kept track of with changes in chemical processes. Okay, so now I just want to mention also the 3 questions framework that exists for all the units. I know this is a lot of stuff on the screen right now, but I just wanted to make sure these are pointed out to you at the very beginning. So for all of the 4 units and that I just told you about, the students do the inquiry, investigations, and molecular modeling using this framework to scaffold their explanations. And we'll talk about it more later, but essentially, when giving an explanation of a carbon transforming process, students know that they need to answer 3 questions. Where are atoms moving? What's happening to carbon atoms? And what's happening to chemical energy? And when they give their explanations, they know they have to follow the rules that atoms last forever, and that atoms can be rearranged to make new molecules, but when that happens, atoms aren't destroyed because they last forever, and that energy lasts forever. And so those are the rules of conservation that we tell students up front that they have to follow during their explanations. And then there's evidence that students can look for that tie into these. So the way that they can look for whether atoms are moving include something like when the mass of materials change. So like the weight data from the investigation says that atoms must be moving. And what's happening to carbon atoms, students can get some information from the investigation about carbon atoms and carbon dioxide being produced or being drawn down. And with that, they can talk about what's happening to carbon atoms, but they may not know, for example, after cellular respiration, where that carbon dioxide comes from. And to learn where that carbon dioxide came from, especially the carbon atom, we do molecular modeling, and then that activity helps them answer the carbon question more fully. Similarly, what's happening to chemical energy? During the investigation, students can observe certain indicators of different forms of energy, like heat and light and motion. But then they need to do the molecular modeling activity to complete the question of what's happening to chemical energy by looking at the atomic molecular level of certain materials to discover carbon-to-carbon and carbon-to-hydrogen bonds, which says that this is an organic material that has chemical potential energy. So we'll definitely do lots more of this later, so I'm sorry if that's too fast, but you can read more about it in the summary document, and we'll do a lot more with this and show you how this framework applies to each activity in the carbon time units in PD workshop activities that we'll have very soon. So just to be able to talk a little bit about the ecosystems unit and the human energy systems unit, these units don't have inquiry investigations per se, but they do have some really interesting materials and resources, and several student-centered activities as well. So for example, some of the resources help students understand carbon transforming processes on ecosystem and global scales. For example, this is an animated PowerPoint that helps explain to students what we mean when we talk about a pool of carbon in an ecosystem. And when we're talking about a pool of carbon atoms in herbivores, that means we're talking about all of the carbon atoms in all of the rabbits that might live in a certain ecosystem. And so some of these materials are kind of interesting and unique, and also we think help uncover chemical processes. So here's an example also of carbon atoms in an ecosystem that move between pools, and we have students take account for carbon pools and fluxes in a quantitative way, scaffolded both by PowerPoints and also by manipulatives that the students have where they can keep track of certain carbon atoms. Just to show you real quick a little bit too about the human energy systems, in this unit, the last unit, we zoom out to a global perspective and zoom back to a long time scale and also add combustion to the carbon transforming processes that we've talked about in the ecosystems unit. So in this unit, students learn about how fossil fuels are created and how the actions of people are related to increasing carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere. So they're talking here, showing matter and energy separately, and energy with squiggly arrows, matter with bold arrows, that fossil fuel formation happened a long time ago when organic materials were compressed, and then now they're extracted for their energy, but the matter comes with it as well. And that's where the problem happens. So that's just a slight introduction. There's a lot of more interesting stuff with those two activities, or 2 units, including student-centered activities that you'll learn about shortly. So I wanted to point out places that you can go for more information about the units. I already mentioned the summary document. We pulled out a few sample materials that you can find in the workshop website under the Files tab in the Sample Materials folder. You can also look for the outlines of all the units, so this will tell you the number of activities in each and a little bit about what those activities are. Under the Files tab in the folder called the Spring Workshop. And then also on the workshop website you can go to a tab along the top that says that's last year's curriculum, and when you click on that tab it'll take you to the web page that has all of last year's curriculum. And just as a reminder though, all of this curriculum is being revised and improved, and so it'll be slightly different for next year. So also, as part of the workshop this spring, we'd like you to take a look at the unit pretests with teacher commentary as a part of the workshop. So these are in the Group Spaces workshop website under the Files tab in a folder called Spring Workshop. And we think the pretests will tell you something about the content of each unit and also something about the learning goals for each unit and how we are using learning progressions to help guide your thinking about student learning. The teacher commentary has information about student learning progression levels in it, so when you're reading it, if you feel like you need to know what these different levels mean, you'll find a description of the levels in the Carbon Time summary document. But don't worry too much about understanding these just yet. We'll spend a lot more time in them in later workshops. So for this workshop though, please post a response to these unit pretests on the workshop website's forum tab. So this is a discussion board for all Carbon Time teachers. So when you go in to post your response, you'll be able to see all the other teachers' responses as well. And just sort of an open-ended, what do you think, what does this tell you about the unit, and what does this tell you about student thinking and the sorts of learning goals for Carbon Time. And just to, in case anyone's having trouble, the place where all of these materials are under the Files tab, Spring Workshop. You can click on, and then you'll see the pretests and commentary PDF that you can download. Also, I just wanted to show a screenshot of where the discussion board is. So this is the forum that I mentioned. So here's where you would post your response to the unit pre and post tests. And so you click on forum, and then you'll have to click on unit pretest post-test, and then to post a reply, you just click on post a reply. Okay, that's out of the way. So I just wanted to say too, so really important to Carbon Time is thinking about student thinking. And here's the 3 ways that we are making Carbon Time student-centered and about student thinking. So the activity sequences make the curriculum a more student-centered curriculum. The inquiry activity sequence allows you to keep track of students' initial predictions and explanations and ideas about a phenomenon, and then the students compare it to their explanations after the inquiry investigation. And the application activity sequence starts with highly scaffolded activities and then fades to place all the responsibilities on the students for making explanations on their own. And so that's these sequences, the way we've used these to structure the units, help, we think, make the units more about students' ideas. And secondly, we've done extensive research about student thinking, and this is underlying all of the curriculum materials that we've developed. And we, during the workshops, are going to train you to use learning progression frameworks to understand your students. And lastly, our program includes a lot of support for using formative assessments and analyzing your student thinking. So in this workshop, you'll get familiar with the unit tests. And if you choose to do these tests online through the testing website, then you'll get an automatic feedback from us about where your students are in the learning progression. So this can be useful to you for thinking about what experiences your students need to move them forward in their understanding of carbon transforming processes. So finally, I'd like to invite you to look over the tables of how Carbon Time curriculum addresses the NRC's framework for K-12 science education. So these documents are on the workshop website in the Files tab. And after you've looked through all of the Carbon Time materials, we'd like you to post on the workshop website forum, the discussion board, the answer to the question, how does Carbon Time compare to your current curriculum? So again, a very open-ended question. We would just like to hear a response from you and for you to be thinking a little bit about that at this time. So again, I'd just like to thank you for bearing with me on a long presentation, and I look forward to interacting with you more in the future. And again, please feel free to email me anytime. Just remember to put a .edu, sorry, that's wrapped around wrong, in the email. And I'm also happy to talk to you on the phone, and I usually am hard to get on the phone, so send me a note and we'll set up a time to talk. And I hope that you enjoy learning more about our curriculum. Thanks.